Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. The White House is going to spend dramatically more money than anyone originally thought on the infrastructure package, and it looks like the White House has a clear idea on how to pay for all of this. Now, the exact specifics are going to be announced. We'll presumably find out later this week. In fact, President Biden is scheduled to speak within 48 hours in Pittsburgh about this massive infrastructure package. But folks, welcome to this episode of Ignition Time, where you'll get the truth wherever the truth might lead us. I educate you on important matters pertaining to the country, the economy, as well as your money. Let's start with this important headline from the Washington Post, and as always, you'll get a link to all of our resources in the description section below. The White House is dramatically going to increase the tax proposal. I'm talking about the next infrastructure package, the Build Back Better agenda, as it's trying to address tensions over the amount of spending in the next stimulus package, in the infrastructure package, which I believe has the potential to be stimulus on steroids, stimulus 2.0. And so what President Biden is going to do is try and do something historic and try and make sure the gap between the rich and the poor is reduced with the next infrastructure spending plan. So this is how important the Build Back Better agenda is to President Biden's, essentially his economic agenda, his legislative agenda, and in fact his entire presidency. I'm going to quote the Washington Post article. Biden's Build Back Better agenda is ambitious in scope, aiming to confront global climate change, rebuild the nation's infrastructure, revive domestic manufacturing, and transform U.S. childcare, among other goals. Beyond blunting the deficit impact, raising taxes also would advance liberals' goals of cutting inequality, because folks, the only way really to pay for this is by raising taxes on corporations and the ultra wealthy, and it looks like the Democrats are heading in that direction. The interesting thing here is that not only is this going to be economically necessary, but this is going to be associated with some risks. But politically, this is likely to be a major victory for the Biden administration. According to Celinda Lake, who's a Democratic pollster who did advise President Biden's 2020 presidential campaign, we know that Republicans, and particularly blue-collar men, really like the physical building kind of infrastructure and see that as leading to good-paying jobs for men in particular. And women and the Democratic base respond to what you might call softer infrastructure, childcare, school, caregiving responsibilities, which may have come home very vividly during the pandemic. In other words, the importance of these became even more apparent, was amplified during the pandemic. Lake also said it'll be a challenge, but they have a major opportunity here to do both in a way that both helps these constituencies, in other words, men and women, and is majorly appealing to them as voters. In other words, this is also about politics. Folks, politics is about timing, opportunity, tribalism, and perception. So what is the president going to announce on Wednesday? He's going to announce a plan that, according to the Washington Post, will center on proposals to repair the nation's physical infrastructure, such as its bridges, railways, ports, water systems, and more, as well as revive domestic manufacturing, invest in research and development, expand clean energy investments, and create a nationwide infrastructure, including charging stations for electric vehicles. And that part of the plan will also include major investments in childcare and educational facilities, and major investments in caretakers for the elderly and the disabled amidst the aging crisis that we face in our country. More and more individuals are getting older. Our population is getting older. In fact, I think it's better we hear from the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on the Biden economic agenda, on the infrastructure plan, and the future of clean energy jobs. Let's hear from the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Let's hear what she said. Let's watch.
Okay, this Wednesday, the president will be laying out the first of two equally critical packages to rebuild our economy and create better paying jobs for American workers. He'll talk this week about investments we need to make in domestic manufacturing, R&D, the caregiving economy, and infrastructure. In the coming weeks, the president will lay out his vision for a second package that focuses squarely on creating economic security for the middle class through investments in childcare, healthcare, education, and other areas. Throughout this process, we look forward to working with a broad coalition of members of Congress to gather their input and ideas and determine the path forward, create good jobs, and make America more competitive. I also note that he's doing this in Pittsburgh, where he launched his campaign for the presidency just 2 years ago. Today, the CDC also announced a 90-day extension of the federal eviction moratorium. The news was out earlier today. The moratorium was scheduled to expire on March 31st and is now extended through June 30th. The president is committed to supporting renters and small landlords through the COVID-19 crisis. Essential to that effort is, of course, the American Rescue Plan, which delivers an additional $21.5 billion in emergency rental assistance to help millions of families keep up on rent and remain in their homes. This, of course, is an act that included coordination from the Treasury Department, from HUD, from the USDA, the CFPB, and the FTC. They're all coordinating efforts. Today, the White House convened leaders from across the administration and is taking coordinated steps to announce a set of bold actions that will catalyze offshore wind energy and create good-paying union jobs. The president recognizes that a thriving offshore wind industry will drive new jobs and economic opportunity up and down the Atlantic coast, in the Gulf of Mexico, and in Pacific waters. We just released a fact sheet on this announcement, pretty detailed. The Department of Interior, Energy, and Commerce announced a shared goal to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind in the United States by 2030, while protecting biodiversity and protecting ocean co-use. Meeting this target will trigger more than $12 billion per year in capital investment in projects on both U.S. coasts, create tens of thousands of good-paying union jobs, with more than 44,000 workers employed in offshore wind by 2030, and nearly 33,000 additional jobs in communities supported by offshore wind activity. It will also generate enough power to meet the demand of more than 10 million American homes and avoid 78 million metric tons of carbon emissions.
And in another segment, which I thought was somewhat cryptic, all that Psaki said was that the president has a plan to pay for this. We don't know what that plan is, but it's very clear that plan is going to involve increased corporate income taxes and increased taxes on the ultra wealthy, and that is going to be a big push from President Biden when we hear from him on Wednesday this week. Let's roll the tape and hear from Jen Psaki.
Two questions, Jen. On the campaign, the president talked about how, and his aides held the view that spending on traditional infrastructure like roads and bridges did not necessarily have to be paid for because it created jobs. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about if he still has that view and how the package unveiled on Wednesday will balance that view of spending versus tax increases.
Well, I think we'll have more to say about it once we actually roll out the package. But I think what I wanted to note today and what we want to make clear is that the president has a plan to fix our infrastructure and a plan to pay for it. But we are also open to having that discussion, and we certainly expect to have the discussion with members of Congress as we move forward about areas where they agree, where they disagree, where they would like to see greater emphasis or not. So we'll look forward to having that conversation once the plan's announced on Wednesday.
That's it, everyone. The massive infrastructure agenda, which is likely to lead to more spending in the trillions of dollars from the Biden administration. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. You'll get a link to the press conference with the White House press secretary and the Washington Post article in the description section below. Check it out and let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Please click the like button. Please subscribe. Please enable notifications. I would really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Don't forget to click subscribe and don't forget to like. It really helps out the YouTube algorithm. I'll see you in the next episode.